Today, we're going to be tackling a tough topic, a really, really important one. Violence against women. It's a global issue. We're going to try and unpack it a bit.
Yeah, I think the first thing to realize is that violence against women, it can mean so many different things, It can be physical assault.
Or sexual.
Yeah, exactly. But it's also psychological. Or it can even be, about controlling someone financially.
So it's not just about getting hit or anything like that.
No, not at all.
It's a whole spectrum of really awful behaviors.
Yeah, things like making threats or stalking, verbally abusing someone, isolating a woman from her friends and family. It's all part of it.
It's scary how much of that stuff just goes unnoticed.
Oh, totally. It's almost normal in some places.
Yeah, and it has such a huge impact on women's lives.
Of course. There can be physical injuries and, trauma.
Right.
But the mental health side of things is huge, too. It can lead to economic instability and, even death.
And it's really important to emphasize that this isn't some personal problem. It's systemic. Yes. It's,
The World Health Organization says that 1 in 3 women experience violence at some point.
Wow.
That's it's mind-blowing.
It is. It really highlights how urgent this issue is. And it's sort of amazing, in a way, that for all the cultural differences we see, a lot of the root causes are very similar all around the world.
So for this deep dive, we're going to look at some specific cases. I think that's the best way to really grasp the human cost of all of this. And then we'll try to zoom out a bit, look at the bigger picture, the societal and systemic factors, all that.
Yeah, exactly. We'll try to analyze how some of these ideas about gender roles and power dynamics, even the legal systems, how all of that creates this climate where violence against women is not only tolerated, but sometimes it's almost expected.
It's really disturbing to think about, but we also want to look at what's being done about it.
Yeah.
From the activists on the ground to policy changes and the newer ways people are trying to prevent it and support the survivors. I think our goal today is to just get a better understanding of all this, how complicated it all is, and maybe get people thinking about how we can all do our part to challenge it.
All right, let's jump in. So first, we've got a case that's still developing, making headlines everywhere. Jazelle.
This case really shows just how bad domestic abuse can get. So Jazelle, she's a mother of 3. She'd gone to the police many times about her husband. Violent threats. Really scary behavior.
So she tried to get help.
Yeah.
But the system basically failed her.
It did. And unfortunately, that happens more than people think.
Yeah, it's just so frustrating. So what happened?
Well, it seems like there were lots of chances to intervene, but nobody really did. There were warning signs, but people didn't see them, or they didn't act on them.
So it wasn't just one big mistake. It was like a lot of smaller things that added up.
Right, and that points to some bigger issues with law enforcement and the courts. A lot of times there's not enough understanding about what domestic abuse actually is.
Yeah, people minimize it. What really strikes me about Jazelle's story is that her husband, he had a history of violence.
Yeah, he did. There were restraining orders. But somehow the system still didn't protect her.
I don't even know what to say. It's awful.
It is, and this happens over and over. It's really hard to get people to take responsibility.
So many cases of domestic violence never even get to court.
Right. The conviction rates are just so low.
And even when there is a conviction, the sentences are often really lenient. It's like the justice system saying it's not a big deal, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, it definitely sends the wrong message.
Jazelle's case is still going on, but it's a perfect example of a much bigger problem. It makes you wonder, how many other women are out there suffering in silence, too afraid, or maybe they don't have the resources to ask for help.
Right. There's so much fear, shame, stigma.
It isolates people.
Exactly. And then, a lot of women just don't trust the institutions that are supposed to protect them.
Yeah, if you don't think anyone's going to help, why would you even bother reporting it?
It's understandable, really.
Jazelle's story is just heartbreaking, but maybe it can be a catalyst for change. It makes us look at these systemic failures.
Yeah, I hope so.
And demand better protection for women.
Yeah. It also shows how important it is to intervene early and do more to prevent this from happening in the first place, not just react after it's too late.
Now, Jazelle's story took place in France, but violence against women, it happens everywhere, all over the world. Let's talk about a case that got a lot of attention internationally, the death of Masa Amini in Iran, 2022.
It was just devastating, and it sparked so much anger, so many protests. It became a symbol, really, of resistance.
Yeah. And to think it all started because of a dress code violation. It's just chilling. It shows how much control some societies try to have over women.
Absolutely. It's about policing women's bodies, their choices. And if they don't conform, there's violence. From individuals, yeah, but from the state itself, too.
Masa's death, I mean, it wasn't just about a hijab. It was about so much more than that.
Right. It was about denying women basic human rights, their autonomy, and the global response, the outrage. It showed that people are fed up. That slogan, woman, life, freedom, it resonated everywhere.
Yeah, it was powerful. And it really showed that these issues are all connected. You can't talk about violence against women without talking about freedom.
Exactly. And that brings us to something else we should discuss. Femicide.
Yeah, that's a term I've been hearing a lot more lately. What does it mean exactly? Why is it different from other types of violence?
So femicide, it's when a woman or girl is killed specifically because they are female. It's a hate crime, rooted in misogyny, the desire to control.
So it's not just any murder that happens to involve a woman.
Right.
It has to be targeted.
Because she's a woman.
Exactly. And I think it's important to make that distinction because then we can really start to understand why these crimes happen, the motivations behind them.
It's like recognizing a whole pattern of behavior.
Which brings us to another case that was just horrifying. Jyoti Singh in India, 2012. That one sparked huge protests too, demands for change.
Oh, it was brutal. Just a horrific example of femicide. It shocked everyone.
It happened in public too.
Yeah, and that's what sparked so much fear and anger.
People had to confront this reality that violence against women is happening. And a lot of times nothing is done about it.
Right, and what's even more disturbing is that some of the people involved in Jyoti's case, they actually tried to blame her for what happened, saying she shouldn't have been out so late. Can you believe that?
It's just, I don't have words. That's the kind of thinking that leads to these crimes in the first place. Like women are somehow responsible for the violence that men inflict upon them. It's insane and dangerous.
It is. It's classic victim blaming.
Shifting the responsibility. And as long as people keep doing that, nothing will change.
It lets the perpetrators off the hook, keeps the cycle going.
But at least with Jyoti's case, there were some positive changes, right?
There were. In India, they changed some of the laws, made the punishments for rape and assault much tougher.
It's not a perfect solution, but it's a start.
Yeah. At least it showed that those crimes won't be tolerated anymore. And it also highlighted how important it is to have a system that actually holds people accountable.
Yeah. It's a reminder that even when things seem really dark, things can get better. The fight for justice, it has to continue.
It does. We can't give up. And it's not just happening over there. In other countries, it's happening closer to home, too. Like, think about Sarah Everard in the UK, 2021.
Oh, that case. That one really got to me. A police officer. The person who's supposed to protect you. It made everyone question who they could trust.
Yeah, it showed that power can be so easily abused, even within the institutions that are supposed to uphold the law. It's scary.
And for women, it just brought up all these fears.
Yeah.
Especially about being safe in public.
Oh, absolutely. Everyone was talking about women's safety.
Yeah.
And how the whole system needs to change to address this problem of male violence.
And the vigil they held for Sarah.
Yeah.
It was so moving, but then the police overreacted.
They did.
And it just added fuel to the fire.
Yeah, I mean, it showed exactly what people were upset about. Like, even the police don't understand women's safety concerns, or they don't care.
It's like they weren't even listening. So let's talk about another case. Gabby Petito in the U.S. 2021. It seemed like everyone was following that story. And it really brought domestic violence into the spotlight.
It did, and it showed just how sneaky domestic abuse can be. At first, it was all about her disappearance. Nobody knew where she was.
Right.
But then we started hearing about her relationship with her fiancé, all the problems they were having. And it became clear that this was a case of intimate partner violence.
The media went crazy with it, though. Some people said it got way more attention because she was young, white, attractive.
Yeah, there was definitely some bias in the coverage. And it's important to remember that domestic violence can happen to anyone, no matter who they are, what they look like.
We have to be careful not to play into those stereotypes.
Right. I think the focus on Gabby's case, it was good in some ways. It raised awareness. But it also meant that other victims, people who don't fit that perfect victim mold, they were overlooked.
Yeah, that's not right.
No, it's not. But even with all the media attention, Gabby's case did start some important conversations about the warning signs and how we can better support victims.
It made people realize that abuse can happen in any relationship.
Exactly. Even if it looks perfect from the outside.
And it wasn't just about the physical abuse either. Gabby's case really showed how damaging the emotional and psychological stuff can be.
Right, people were talking about coercive control, gaslighting, emotional manipulation, and that was so important because sometimes those things are harder to see.
Exactly. Domestic violence, it's not always black and white. There's so many layers.
It is, and that's why it's so important to recognize the signs before it's too late.
Okay, so we've talked about cases in Europe, the US, and the Middle East. Now let's look at a place where femicide has become a major crisis. Mexico. The statistics there are just horrific.
They are. I mean, think about it. 10 women murdered every single day.
Just because they're women.
It's a national emergency. And it all comes down to this really toxic mix of things. You've got the machismo culture, a history of letting perpetrators get away with it, and then you've got corruption in the police, in the courts.
One case that really brought this issue to light was Ingrid Escamilla's death back in 2020.
Oh, that was awful, the brutality of it. And then the photos of her body were leaked to the press.
Yeah, it was disgusting. Like they were trying to humiliate her even after she was dead.
It was a complete violation. And it led to so many protests. People were demanding justice. They were using that slogan, ni una menos, not one less. It was a real rallying cry.
Yeah, I remember that. The government had to finally admit how bad the problem was. But even so, the murders keep happening.
They do. And a lot of times, nobody's held accountable. It's like, it's not enough to just be aware of the problem. We need action, real change. And we have to challenge the cultural norms that make this okay and the systems that allow it to continue.
Okay, so let's connect all these stories, all these cases we've talked about. What are some of the patterns we're seeing?
Well, I think it's clear that cultural norms play a huge role. Misogyny is everywhere. These attitudes about women, they create an environment where violence is seen as acceptable.
Can you give us some examples?
Sure. Think about things like catcalling.
Ugh. Yep.
Or when people blame the victim, or all that locker room talk stuff.
It's all just a joke, but it's not funny.
Exactly. It's all part of this culture of disrespect.
Yeah.
And it sets the stage for more serious violence.
It's like it normalizes the idea that women are less than men. Yeah. That they're objects to be controlled.
Yeah, and that leads to the problems we see in the system. The police, the courts, they don't take it seriously. They don't hold people accountable.
And that just sends the message that it's okay.
Yeah.
That women don't deserve protection.
Right. It's a vicious cycle. And to break it, we have to change the way people think.
Yeah, and the way the system works.
Yeah.
And this brings us to another important concept, intersectionality.
Yes. So intersectionality, it basically means that different types of oppression, they're all connected.
Like sexism and racism.
Right.
Or classism.
Exactly. And they all overlap. So for women, it's not just about being female. It's about how all these other factors can make you even more vulnerable to violence.
Can you explain that a little more?
Sure. So for instance, Indigenous women in Canada, they face way more violence than non-Indigenous women. And that's because of their history. Colonization, systemic discrimination, all of that makes them more vulnerable. And that's what intersectionality is all about, seeing how all these issues connect and come together.
So it's like saying you can't address one problem without addressing the others.
Exactly. You have to look at the whole picture and find solutions that work for everyone.
So welcome back to our deep dive on violence against women. It's been heavy stuff, but it's important to talk about it.
Absolutely. We need to face these issues head on. But, you know, along with all the pain and the seriousness, there are also stories of hope, of people fighting back, people who are working to make things better for women.
Yeah, we want to focus on that now because change is happening. There are people out there making a difference, and we can all be a part of that.
And a lot of that hope, it comes from the survivors themselves, women who've been through so much, but they still find a way to speak out, to heal, to help others.
It's pretty inspiring, actually, to see that kind of strength. It shows that you can find your voice, even when it feels like the whole world is trying to silence you.
And we have to remember, survivors aren't just victims. They're agents of change. They're advocates, artists, writers, leaders, and they're using their experiences to make a difference.
They're the ones who are really breaking the silence, challenging the stigma, demanding accountability.
Exactly. Think about Tarana Burke, for example. She started the #MeToo movement, and that's had a huge impact all over the world.
Oh, yeah. #MeToo changed everything. It gave survivors a platform to share their stories, to connect with each other, and to demand real change.
Yeah, it showed just how widespread sexual violence is, and it showed the power of speaking out together.
And #MeToo isn't the only movement out there. There are amazing women's groups doing great work all over the world.
Oh, tons of them. Look at the Ni Una Menos movement. in Latin America. That started in Argentina because of all the femicides happening there. And it's spread all over. It's mobilizing people, getting them to stand up and say, enough is enough.
Mi una menos, not one less. It's a powerful statement, isn't it?
It is. It's about urgency. It's about saying, we won't accept this anymore.
And these movements aren't just about talk. They're getting things done. They're pushing for tougher laws, better support systems, and more prevention programs.
They're making governments listen, making them take action.
Right, holding their feet to the fire.
And then there are all these smaller groups, too, working at the local level, providing shelter and support, educating people, fighting for policy changes, helping women become more independent financially.
Those groups are so important. They're often the only ones who can help when someone's in crisis.
Exactly. And they always need more help, more volunteers, more donations. So if you're feeling inspired, that's a great place to start.
We mentioned a few organizations earlier, like UN Women, Women's Aid, RAIN. There are so many out there doing amazing work. So find one that speaks to you and see what you can do.
Yeah, even small things can make a difference. And don't forget about the power of your own voice. You can speak out against sexism, call out those stupid jokes, have honest conversations with the people around you. That all matters.
It's about being an active bystander, not just ignoring things when they happen. It's about being an ally, using your voice to help those who don't have the same platform.
This deep dive has been tough. We've looked at some really horrible realities, the violence, the systems that perpetuate it. It's a global crisis, no doubt.
But we've also seen hope, the strength of survivors, the dedication of the people working to change things. And that's what we need to focus on.
We have a choice. We can let the problem overwhelm us, or we can be part of the solution.
So here's our challenge to you. What are you going to do to make a difference? How are you going to help create a world where all women are safe and respected?
Remember, even the smallest actions can have a ripple effect. They can lead to real change.
Thanks for joining us. We hope this has given you some things to think about.